Journal webinar series, where you can find insights and forward-looking research on future and evolving technologies. The ITU Journal is an international journal providing complete coverage of all communications and networking paradigms, free of charge for both readers and authors. This publication considers yet-to-be-published papers addressing fundamental and applied research, building bridges between disciplines, connecting theory with application, and stimulating international dialogue. Its interdisciplinary approach reflects ITU's comprehensive field of interest and explores the convergence of ICT with other disciplines. We count on your support to make this webinar an interesting experience. Please submit your questions to the speaker using the live video wall feature. All questions from the audience will be taken during the Q&A session after the talk. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the ITU Journal Webinars series playlist on YouTube. We hope that you will enjoy the talk, and we encourage you to stay connected until the end for the Wisdom Corner. Live Life Lessons. I will now give the floor to our Master of Ceremonies.
Hello, and welcome to the webinar series of the ITU Journal on Future and Evolving Technologies. My name is Alessia Magliarditi from ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies. It is my pleasure to offer our first webinar of the season, kindly hosted by the i4Good platform as part of the ITU Journal Discovery Series with Professor Da Silva from Virginia Tech. So please submit your question via the Q&A channel, and we will address them to our speaker during the Q&A session. And after the Q&A, I will moderate the Wisdom Corner, live life lessons. So please stay online. Our speaker agreed to a personal chat. He will share with us some lessons learned over the years that might perhaps be useful for some of you. I'm pleased now to introduce Professor Ian Akilditz, Editor-in-Chief of the ITU Journal and founder and president of Truva from the United States. Professor Akilditz is Ken Bayer Chair Professor in Telecommunications Emeritus at the Georgia Institute of Technology. And he has established many research centers worldwide, including in South Africa, in Spain, Saudi Arabia, and Finland. He's editor-in-chief emeritus of impact factor journals, highly cited and at the top of the most prestigious international rankings. Ian is visiting distinguished professor in several universities around the world, and his current research interests are in 6G wireless systems, terahertz communication, metaverse, and communication in challenged environments. So, Professor Akilditz, the floor is yours for your opening remarks and to introduce our speaker and moderate the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessia. And I was running to turn on my light. It was very dark. So I caught you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our global community joining us from every corner of the world. A very warm welcome from Abu Dhabi. I just arrived here yesterday as we proudly launch, I think, season 5, right, Alessia? Episode 1 of the ITU Journal on Future and Evolving Technologies, in short form, ITU FET webinar series. This series is our stage for the visionaries who are not just following technological trends, but actively creating the future. And today we are thrilled to introduce one of the most dynamic leaders in our research field, Professor Luis Da Silva. Before we begin, let us revisit the powerful mission that drives our journal. Born from a transformative vision in 2020, our journal was conceived to shatter the traditional walls between academia and industry. Our goal is audacious: to accelerate global innovation by fostering deep collaborative research at the very frontiers of technology. The journal's rapid rise as a premier publication is a tribute to our exceptional team. My profound goes to Sizo Ono-san, Bilal Jamusi, Alessia Magliarditi, you just saw her, and also other heroes in the background, Erika Campilongo, Maria Otero, and also Pauline, I don't know that you will see her too, and the many dedicated individuals whose relentless passion has built our journal into the respected global platform it is today. To all, we extend our invitation. Please submit your papers to our journal. Also, you are welcome to propose special issues that will define the next technological frontiers. Your ideas are the engine of our collective progress. And now it is my distinct honor to introduce our future speaker. Professor Luis da Silva is the inaugural executive director of the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative, in short form CCI, uniting 47 Virginia institutions in a mission to advance cybersecurity research, innovation, and workforce development. Luis also holds the prestigious Bradley Professor of Cybersecurity Chair at Virginia Tech. With a prolific record of 2 books and over 300 peer-reviewed articles, his influence is undeniable. His excellence has been recognized with numerous awards, including 2023 Golden Geese Mentoring Award and 2024 Dean's Award for Excellence in Service, and also a former chair at Trinity College Dublin, Ireland. I visited him that time too. That was back in 2019, as I can recall. Director of Ireland's Connect Center, that was also very prestigious, or also is still prestigious, and a fellow of both Trinity College and the IEEE. Luis is a true luminary. So Luis, we are truly privileged to have you with us. The stage is yours. We look forward to your talk. Again, thanks for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much, Ian, for this exceedingly generous introduction. And thank you, Alessia, as well, for inviting me. And thank you all who are listening to this talk. Let me share my screen so that you can see the slides. Okay, so I hope that you can see my slides now. The topic that I decided to talk to you about today is the path to reliability and resilience in the next generation of networks. And this is work that we started with a former PhD student of mine, Andrea Gomez, who is now an assistant professor at Rowan University, and is now continuing with a current PhD student at Virginia Tech, Gabriel Vieira, and a professor at Virginia Tech, Jacek Kibilda. Before I actually start, I'd like to say a few words about CCI. Ian has already introduced what this is, but my main role today at Virginia Tech is to lead this multi-institution initiative throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, which brings together 47 universities and colleges with a common vision of positioning the Commonwealth as a globally recognized leader in cybersecurity with a mission of research, innovation, and workforce development. So I wear this administrative hat as executive director of CCI and continue to do my own research as a wireless and wireless security researcher. Okay, now to the topic of today's webinar. The motivation of all of this is the increasing interest in reliability in networks, and in particular wireless networks. So we saw that in the lead up to 5G and in the vision for 5G, which established one of the main services to be supported as ultra-reliable, low-latency communication. And now evolving in MT 2030 to the vision for 6G, we have an evolution of that concept into what's being called hyper-reliable and low-latency communication. The basic idea of this is that there is a desire to usher in a new generation of applications to be supported by mobile networks. Traditionally, for the past several generations, the basic model for mobile networks is to support human subscribers and support their communication of data primarily and voice to some extent. And the idea is that if the network is capable of offering ultra reliability or hyper reliability, then you can have a new generation of applications, which may include augmented reality and virtual reality, for example, may include autonomous vehicles and autonomous driving, may include factory automation. We start hearing about what are called dark factories or light out factories. So factories where there are really no human beings during the day. You don't even need to turn on the lights. It's all fully automated. These types of applications require a very high degree of reliability, much beyond has been offered by mobile networks in the past. And reliability is often expressed as a number of nines. So I'm going to be mentioning 5 nines or 4 nines. So 5-9 reliability just means that you can count on the network 99.999% of the time. And therefore, you have an outage probability that's very, very low. That may be less than 0.001% of the time. So very rare events would already break this high degree of reliability. So it does require a different management of resources on the part of the network to achieve that level of reliability. One way to achieve that is by adding redundancy. So that's kind of the traditional way that you get to extremely high reliability. In other types of services, you add some redundancy, you have a plan B, a plan C, etc., so that the probability that all of these fail becomes very, very small. However, redundancy is costly. So what motivated the whole study that I'm going to describe today is the desire to quantify the resources that are needed to achieve this very high reliability. Okay, so we need to start by characterizing reliability. And to do that, we look at both ITU efforts and 3GPP efforts, which then provide us with one mathematical framework for us to think about reliability. So the 3GPP defines this as the success probability of transmitting a certain number of bits within a certain deadline. So the success probability alpha of transmitting delta bits within a user plane deadline of tau would then establish a reliability of alpha. Okay, so then one question becomes, what's the transmit time depends on? And if we think about simply a wireless channel, we can model the ability of the channel to support a certain data rate by using the Shannon capacity, and then we can invert that and find what level of bandwidth, omega, is required to achieve a reliability of alpha. So that's going to be a function of the user plane deadline tau, of the number of bits that you want to put through delta, and then the actual spectral efficiency that is achievable in a given channel. So that leads to this expression that says that the amount of bandwidth required, omega, is equal to delta over tau times the alpha quantile of the inverse of the spectral efficiency. So it will depend on the signal to interference to noise ratio observed in the network, of course, and you can start modeling that and figuring out how much bandwidth you need to achieve, let's say, alpha greater than or equal to 99.999% or 5 nines. And we started to do this using simulations. So we estimate this quantile, this alpha quantile, using Monte Carlo simulations. We use a system model that's also provided by 3GPP of an urban macro network. These are modeled as interference limited networks with full frequency reuse. We look at 3 frequency bands at 700 megahertz, 4.4 gigahertz, and 30 gigahertz, and then different antenna models depending on the band. We also adopt 3GPP, line of sight and non-line of sight, path loss, and fading models. And we distributed the base stations in this network according to a Poisson-point process. And by doing that, we can simulate the system. We need to have a very robust number of simulations to get at this extremely low probability of outage. And we get this plot, which I'm going to blow up in the next slide, which tells us for a given density of base stations, how much bandwidth you need to achieve a certain value of alpha of 1 9, 3 9s, and 5 9s for each of the 3 frequency bands. So we notice a couple of things from this plot. So as you densify the network, then you need a little bit less bandwidth. So densification does help to a certain extent. But after some point, this flattens out. And the other thing that you notice is that the levels of bandwidth, the amount of bandwidth that you have to achieve these high values of alpha is very, very high. So can be order of 10 to the 8, 10 to the 9 hertz. So not really feasible in most practical systems. So you would need, if you just want to throw bandwidth at the problem, you need really extremely large amounts of bandwidth. So that led us to think about what happens if you try to do things a little bit more efficiently, in that we do it through multi-operator connectivity sharing. So what happens if instead of trying to just densify the network a lot and throw a lot of bandwidth at it, if we allow a mobile to simultaneously connect to multiple base stations? And we can have different forms of this kind of connectivity sharing. So first of all, you can do it with a single operator. You can allow a network, if it's, a mobile, if it's within range of multiple base stations, to multi-connect and then select the channel that's best at any given time. Or we can do network sharing, where you allow your mobile to connect not only to multiple base stations of its home operator, but also base stations of other operators. So essentially doing a multi-connectivity in addition to roaming. So we model all of these different options. So first, there's a baseline, the single connectivity to a single operator, which are the numbers and the results that I showed in the previous slide. Then multi-connectivity to a single operator. So you still have your home operator and you can connect to multiple base stations. By doing that, you can achieve the same level of reliability with less bandwidth being required. And then multi-connectivity using base stations of multiple operators, which again allows you to achieve the same level of reliability with less bandwidth for each of the operators. So these are the 4 plots that you see there. The blue one is single operator, single connectivity. The brown one is multi-connectivity to one operator. So there's a reduction for any given density of the amount of bandwidth needed to achieve, in this case, 5 9s of reliability. And then the other 2 plots, the green and the red, are showing multi-connectivity to multiple operators. And they only differ by the way that we model the geographic distribution of the base stations of the 2 operators. So in the green, you're really modeling the 2 operators accounting for some degree of clustering between the base station of different operators, because in reality, what you often see in a deployment in any urban environment or a rural environment actually is many times both operators or two operators put their base stations in close proximity to each other, sometimes even on the same physical infrastructure. So we account for that, but it makes a difference only at the margins. It's not a huge difference if you account for this kind of clustering or if you assume that these multiple operators are just independently positioning their base stations. The only difference is that in one case, we model the distribution of the base stations according to independent plus 1 point processes. In the other case, we use a Gauss plus 1 point process to account for clustering. Okay, so we do see that at least in these simulations, you do see an improvement in terms of how much bandwidth is required to achieve high reliability. We wanted to see whether this was actually observable in reality. So we actually did some walk tests in an area in Dublin, Ireland. So Ian mentioned that prior to returning to Virginia Tech, I was a professor at Trinity College Dublin, and at that time we did some actual tests where volunteers, students, researchers carried essentially smartphones with SIM cards from 3 different operators active in Ireland and measured the strength of the signal from all 3 at the same time in the same locations. And we did that in 3 regions in Dublin. So what you see is an aerial map of the city of Dublin. On the right-hand side in the bottom, that's an area close to Trinity College Dublin, very much city center. Across the river to the north, you see an area that is highly commercial, lots of financial industry, large companies, and so on. And on the left-hand side of the picture, that's a more residential area. And if you visit Dublin, one very famous landmark is the Guinness storehouse. So that's that general area if you're familiar with that. So we had someone collecting data in all these 3 areas from the 3 operators, which we're calling MNO0, MNO1, and MNO2. And what we find out is that there are areas where all 3 provide good coverage. There are a few areas that all 3 provide bad coverage. But what's more common in the areas where one is providing poor coverage is that one of the others is making up for that. And you can actually have high signal strength from one of the other operators. So we see a lot of complementarity in coverage in the areas of lower reliability, which confirms that the intuition that by applying multi-operator connectivity, you can actually improve your reliability and have to assign less bandwidth to the service. Any given operator has to assign less bandwidth. We went a little bit further and we figured out, okay, what exactly are the users that can benefit from multi-operator connectivity? And it turns out that it's intuitive, but what the results show is that it's the operators, that's the mobile users that have the worst coverage, so that are placed in locations which have poor coverage that will actually benefit. So if you are an operator and you want to get into an agreement with your competitor, another operator, for this kind of multi-operator connectivity, you wouldn't necessarily offer it to every single user all the time, but you would try to only apply this multi-operator connectivity to the users that are experiencing worse channel conditions. So this is summarized in this result that if we only apply multi-operator connectivity to the 20% weakest SNR users, so the 20% of the users that experience the weakest signal-to-noise ratio, then you can actually increase the capacity by about 50% through multi-user connectivity. And then the other 80% of your mobile users, you just service them using their home network operator. Okay, so we did this initial study that looked at how to achieve high reliability and how much bandwidth you need for that. And we did that primarily through simulation. And then that led us to ask a slightly different questions. So if you think about the coverage area of a network, you're interested in what reliability your typical user gets. But it might also be interesting to look at what percentage of the coverage area you are actually offering high reliability service. So this is what these pictures are meant to illustrate. So the blue dots are base stations that are distributed randomly according to a post-on-point process. And the white areas are the areas of high reliability, so the areas where the network is providing high reliability over 5 nines, so 99.999%. In the red areas where the network is providing lower reliability, lower than 5 nines. And one question is, what percentage of the total area you are achieving this high reliability? So on the left-hand side is a depiction of a network where the high reliability is achieved only over 37.7% of the total geographic area, whereas on the right, you are achieving this high reliability over 81.2% of the total area. So we are calling this a reliability coverage study. So how much of the coverage area you can achieve high reliability. And we take a stochastic geometry approach to analyzing this question. And what you're really dealing with is two probabilities. So the probability of being able to deliver some amount of data, delta, within a deadline tau, and then the probability over an area of coverage that that initial probability is greater than or equal to alpha. So it's a probability of another probability, and you can use a construction called meta distributions to analyze that. And we try to obtain actually closed form expressions for how much bandwidth is required to support alpha levels of reliability over eta fraction of the network service area. Again, a probability of a probability. So we start with this link reliability, which is what I had described previously. So alpha is the probability of being able to transmit delta bits with a user plane latency tau, given a signal to interference and signal to interference ratio. This is an interference limited network for a given point pattern phi. So the phi point pattern is just describing the point pattern that's used in our stochastic geometry model. And then from link reliability, we build this idea of spatial reliability. So what is the proportion of the service area where this alpha reliability is supported? So this value eta is the probability that the probability of being able to deliver delta bits within the user plane latency tau is greater than or equal to alpha. So probability of a probability is a meta distribution, so a distribution function of a conditional distribution. And therefore, you can invert that. And if you're looking for the value of omega, the value of bandwidth, then that's the inverse of the CDF of the inverse of the CDF. And that expression for omega, that's fairly ugly expression, and all of these inverses represents the bandwidth required to support ultra-reliable connectivity in the alpha reliability level in a fraction eta of the network area. And it turns out that there is some work in stochastic geometry, for example, by Martin Henge and his group, looking at this sort of meta distributions and how they can be used to model cellular networks. And using that, we can actually derive some expressions for the bandwidth omega. And the top expression in the lemma is a closed form expression, which is an approximation, which expresses omega as a function of omega, again, the bandwidth, as a function of the number of bits that you want to transmit, the deadline tau, the level of reliability alpha, the spatial reliability, the proportion of the total coverage area where you want to achieve that reliability, that's eta, and B is the path loss exponent. All right, so and by the way, I'm going to point you to some of the papers where this is derived. So I'm of course not going to talk about the derivation here, but it's possible to achieve this this expression. And you can go even one step further because you're really interested in very large values of alpha. So as alpha approaches 1, so very, very high reliability, 5 nines, etc. And if you do that, you can take that log in the expression in the lemma and expand it using a Taylor series expansion, and then approximate it using the first term of that expansion. And that leads you to this expression in the remark. It's still a function of these same things: delta, number of bits, tau, the deadline, B, path loss exponent, alpha, reliability, eta, the proportion of the total area of coverage where that reliability is achieved. And since this is an easier expression, simpler expression than the one above, then it's a little bit easier to interpret. And the rule of thumb that comes out of that expression is for each 9 that you increase the reliability. So if you go from 3 nines to 4 nines, from 4 nines to 5 nines, that requires 1 order of magnitude increase in the bandwidth. And you can look at the plot on the right-hand side, and that will show you all of these different expressions. So you have there the blue line, that's the lemma. So that's the first approximation. The X's are the simulation, so you can compare the results from simulation to that approximation. And it then matches very well, actually, across the board for different values of spatial reliability and for different values of link reliability alpha, so 1 9, 3 nines, and 5 nines. And then the brown dotted line or dashed line represents the expression in the remark. And the expression in the remark also matches very well both the lemma and the simulation for most values of spatial reliability. They start deviating at very, very low levels of spatial reliability, but that's really not the region of interest, right? So we're not really interested in figuring out what happens when only a very tiny portion of the coverage area achieves high reliability. We're much more interested in the area of the curves towards the right, so towards higher levels of spatial reliability. And then you also see this intuition that for every 9, so if you go from the curves for alpha equals 0.9 to the one alpha equals 0.999, etc., for every 9 that you add 1 order of magnitude in bandwidth. So these 3 curves are each one is 2 nines apart from the other one, right? So from 1 9 to 3 nines to 5 nines, and therefore 2 orders of magnitude more bandwidth for a given level of spatial reliability. Approximately, there's a rule of thumb. So we're very happy that we could actually come up with closed form expressions, which allows us to build more intuition about these bandwidth requirements. And then we went one step further, looking at multi-operator connectivity. So again, we're really interested in what happens if we allow the mobile to multi-connect, so to connect to base stations of multiple operators. The expression becomes uglier, so more complex, but it's still possible to come up with a closed form expression for this approximation. Again, it's all the same thing. So at the end of the day, we're looking for how much bandwidth is needed to support a level of reliability alpha. For a proportion of the total average area of coverage eta. Delta is the number of bits that we want to transmit. Tau is the deadline. B is the path loss exponent. And now we have one more parameter here in this expression, which is K, which tells us how many operators we have available to us. Right? So, and by the way, in reality, in practice, in most places you have 3 operators is kind of a typical number. So it's very uncommon to have a very large number of operators, and so we're really interested in small values of K. Okay, so we have this expression. We can again plot this closed form expression, and we can compare it to simulation to see how well they match. So the straight lines on the right are the lemma, so the expression, and the x's are simulation. And again, we're looking at 1 9, 3 nines, and 5 nines. And the rule of thumb here is that in the case of multi-operator connectivity sharing, as we talked about before in the beginning of the presentation, we can achieve this high level of reliability with less bandwidth. And the rule of thumb becomes that for every 9 of reliability, so as you go from 1 9 to 2 nines to 3 nines, etc., that requires, for every 2 nines, that requires 1 order of magnitude increase in bandwidth. So with a single operator, for every 1 9 in reliability, you had to add another order of magnitude of bandwidth. With this multi-operator, in the case of 2 operators, which is what the plot shows, for every 2 nines of reliability, 1 order of magnitude in increase in bandwidth. So you already do a lot better. So we can compare the single operator versus the multi-operator connectivity sharing. So in the plot here, the red shows the single operator, so one of the first lemmas that we showed a couple of slides ago. And then the other straight lines, the blue, the brown, the green, are for the lemma using multiple operators. And we really show for 2 operators, 4 and 8 operators, even though, in practice, you would rarely or never see 8 operators. But you see the substantial gain that you get even going from a single operator to 2 operators. And then there's more gain to be had if you go to 3 or 4 operators, and then it kind of levels off. So it doesn't, the gain doesn't keep going forever. Okay, so takeaways for this part, and I have a little bit of a follow-up after this, so there's not a conclusion for the whole talk, but takeaways to up to now. So summarizing all that we discussed, first of all, the first finding is that the bandwidth that is required to support ultra reliability is very high. So if you just try to throw bandwidth at the problem, what is required can significantly exceed what is really feasible. Multi-operator connectivity sharing is a way around that limitation. That actually builds up on a lot of work that I've done in my group and in collaboration with people like Linda Doyle at Trinity College and others on network sharing. So, and that dates back a couple of decades when there was a lot of research on cognitive radio and spectrum sharing, and that led us to look at network sharing as an efficient way to manage resources in these networks. And at that time, we were not looking at ultra reliability. We were looking at more traditional coverage and capacity questions. But it's also true for ultra reliability that you can improve in terms of the resources that are needed significantly when you do network sharing. You might not do network sharing or support network sharing for all of your subscribers. If you're an operator, you may want to do this in a more targeted way. So whenever a subscriber is starting to experience less favorable channels, then you would allow them to multi-connect to some other operator, and that's where you'd be most efficient in the use of resources. And then we looked at this more analytical modeling of this question of how much bandwidth is needed. First, in terms of the link reliability, and then in terms of network-wide spatial reliability, and came up with these rules of thumb that if you have only a single operator, 1/9 increase in reliability requires 1 order of magnitude increase in bandwidth. When you have 2 operators, 2/9 increase in reliability requires 1 order of magnitude increase in bandwidth. Okay. So we then moved on to some work that we're currently doing. So the work that I've described so far has all been published and fairly mature. But what we're doing now is looking at a different environment. So all of that work, as I mentioned early on, is using an urban macro model of the network. And we believe that ultra reliability we will see first in private networks. And those could be outdoors, could be indoors. So we decided to look specifically at the problem of how do we model reliability in an indoor industrial environment. These dark factories that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, for example. So there are models from 3GPP for that sort of environment. And we adopted those models. So the models basically determine the distribution of the base stations. It's quite different from an urban macro model where we use stochastic geometry. In this case, the 3GPP model accounts for a much more regular distribution of the base stations in a lattice type of deployment. 3GPP also defines 4 environments for this, which they call sparse low, sparse high, and dense high. And depending on where the base stations are positioned, high or low within this industrial environment, and depending on how much cluttering there is in the environment. So either low cluttering, sparse cluttering, not a lot of things that will block connectivity and cause shadowing, or dense environments with a lot of cluttering in the environments. And our initial results are that, first of all, you still require a lot of bandwidth. So we initially thought, okay, maybe the bandwidth requirements that we found in an urban macro environment are not going to be as high as in this more industrial environment. But it turns out that they are, because these are very interference limited environments or networks. So if you do full frequency reuse and omnidirectional transmission, and all base stations are active and so on, what you see is an extremely interference heavy environment. And at the end of the day, that will still result, especially for some of the four environments, the dense low, for example, requires extremely high levels of bandwidth. This is ongoing work, so we are experimenting with different models for this environment. So based on how much blockage there is in the environment, what kind of blockage, what kind of materials exist in the blocking, what is the impact of frequency reuse, what's the impact of the directional transmission. So all of that is currently the work of a current PhD student at Virginia Tech. But trying to characterize, like we did for the urban macro environment, what the needs are in the case of these industrial indoor environments. And then just a few words about where we are also going in some of our current projects. So we have a couple of different projects funded by the National Science Foundation. One of them is a collaboration with the University of Oulu in Finland. And the other one is a collaboration with Trinity College Dublin in Ireland and Queen's University Belfast in Northern Ireland. And both of these projects are trying to get to the question of not just reliability, but resilience. And so I have like a small reminders of the difference between resilience, robustness, and reliability. So reliability is what we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes or so, is the ability to perform consistently well. So in the case of these wireless networks, the ability to have very few outages and then to be able to deliver data within a certain deadline. Robustness has to do with the ability to withstand adversity. So, how the network can be not affected. So a very robust network will not be affected by some levels of adversity. So either failure of equipment or cyber attacks, or anything that tries to move the network from its operating point. And resilience has to do with the ability to recover. So how a network, when facing some adversity, again, could be a natural phenomenon, could be the failure of a piece of equipment, or it could be an attack, that the network may decrease in terms of its performance, but it should be able to bounce back. Maybe not even bounce back immediately to its original level of performance, but bounce back to some level of performance. So this is kind of a simple visualization of this. So you are operating the network at some level of performance, something happens, either accidental or deliberate, and you see the performance decrease. Resilience has to do with being able to then bring the network back to some higher level of performance. May not be the original one, maybe some intermediate level, but how do you come back? So we start looking at metrics like recovery time. So how long does it take on average to bounce back? And the recovery point objective. So where do you bounce back to? So if it's not to the original operating point, somewhere in between, some level of performance that is maybe a little bit lower than the original one, but better than the one observed right after this phenomenon occur. So that's what we're looking into, in how different trends in 6G also affect that. So things like the prevalence of AI in 6G, so this idea of AI native 6G, will also create new points of potential failure through the use of all of this AI. So of course, on average, you expect to see much improved performance and management of resources. But what happens if something impacts that AI-driven management of the network? The diversified supply chain, the softwareization of these networks, all of these new trends, we're trying to map how those trends affect the resilience of the network. In my mind, there is a fundamental distinction between how we think about reliability in terms of the network. Reliability has been thought about as a service, right? So you have a network that maybe is optimized for high performance for traditional subscribers. So you may have a network that's optimized for massive machine type communications, so IoT types of applications, or you can have a network that's optimized for high reliability in support of the sorts of applications that I described before, AR, VR, and autonomous driving, etc. So that's a service that you could imagine being part of a service level agreement between the operator and the users. But reliability is not really a service. Oh, sorry, resilience is not really a service. Resilience is a characteristic, in my opinion, of the network itself. So you need to design these networks so that they are resilient, no matter what's the type of service. Now, the different types of services, so ultra-reliable low latency or machine type communication or broadband, may require different levels of resilience, may require different operating points, different recovery times. But resilience is an intrinsic characteristic of the network as you design it, and not a service that you provide to a subset of your subscribers. So we're trying to model that. Of course, the discussion on reliability feeds into this discussion on resilience. So we're achieving high reliability, and is that service resilient to disruption? That's where we are now. These are the two projects that I mentioned with Finland and with Ireland and Northern Ireland are brand new. So stay tuned, and hopefully we'll have more results to publish and present in short order. I'll leave you with some of the references of what I talked about today. So a lot of this work has appeared in a couple of journals, IEEE Communication Letters. We have two of those papers that describe things like the meta distribution used for the geographic idea of reliability. We also have another paper that I didn't describe here, but talking about how do you model high reliability, since it requires so much simulation. So how can you kind of do this in a more efficient way? And then some papers on the idea of network sharing. And then, as I say, there's some other work that's brand new that we are currently in the process of submission. I'm going to stop here. So I've been going for about 50 minutes, and I wanted to leave some time for questions in discussion. So again, thank you for your attention. I'll give the floor back to Ian and to everyone who wants to pose any questions.
Hello again. Thanks a lot, Luis. It was very nice and really very motivating work. And I was looking for questions from the audience because we have another platform. It's AI first. So I was going back and forth. And so far, I could not see some useful questions, and I will start to ask you some, and then hoping that in the meantime, some other folks can write their questions. So now my first question is about the multi-operator sharing you mentioned about, and this may introduce some complexity in the control plane, especially when we do dynamic resource allocations and like synchronizations and other things. So you have these ultra uh, reliable low latency case, like around 1 millisecond latency budget. So what is the feasible architecture for this inter-operator coordination? So in other words, the signaling overhead and latency themselves will become a new bottleneck. And so you try to save some performance, but also you may pay some penalty, right? Because of these negotiations. So how do you address that problem?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ian. And so you can't really afford to change connectivity, in real time, because you're dealing with these very tight deadlines for low latency. So the way that we model this is that you would connect simultaneously. So you would basically replicate the data flows in connecting to more than one base stations at the same time. Now, the price that you pay for this is that you're, of course, duplicating the use of resources. You're basically transmitting over two channels at the same time as where one is basically the backup for the other one, is the redundant one. And that's why we think that it's not really feasible to do this for all the subscribers. So the way
Right,
that you would envision doing that is once an operator detects that a subscriber is going below a certain level of service in terms of the quality of the channel that they are experiencing, and they would start allowing this multi-connectivity, and then you would have simultaneous transmission to two operators. And then in case one channel dropped below a certain threshold, then you would automatically communicate through the other channel.
yeah,
It introduces a lot of complexities that we do not model, right? So we modeled a simplified version of this, but of course, in reality, this would be a lot more complex in terms of how do you establish the end-to-end connections and how
right.
the data would actually flow through one operator to the other operator, depending on channel quality. And we haven't dealt with these more control plane questions.
Yeah, because when you get outside of your lab or experiments, then it becomes a zoo, meaning like it's much more complicated. And like here's about the same context. It will really this multi-operator sharing a reality. So let me give you an example. So like if we have heavily deployed operator A to share its own spare resources with a less deployed operator B, especially when those resources are critical for A's own reliability guarantees.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like dynamic decisions, right? So you cannot just give your own resource which you need. So are you looking at those also in your research?
Yeah, not at the moment. We did a little bit of that analysis early on when we were thinking about dynamic spectrum sharing among operators, right? So as you know, there was a lot of there has been it's still an active area of research on dynamic spectrum sharing, and one way that you can share spectrum is among operators. But you run in that case into more both policy and commercial questions. So of because these are competitors, so it may suit them to cooperate in some cases, but they primarily want to preserve their own requirements and their own service level agreements. So they won't allow another operator to use resources if that hurts any of their current subscribers, for one thing. And then the other thing is that sometimes they want to preserve competitive advantage, right? They want to say my deployment is much better because I provide better coverage, and it's not in my interest to help another operator to provide better service. So you do get into these questions that are more policy and commercial based.
And also
We're seeing
service.
a little bit of that happen in
Yeah,
some cases. So for things like neutral hosting, for example, right? So in some areas where you see the same equipment being used to host services for multiple operators. So there's some modest examples of this. But yeah, it's still, I think the questions may be less technical even
true.
and more
Yeah,
commercial.
I think there will be some new service level agreements. That's, like they need to decide what to do in this type of scenarios.
Yeah.
It will all be based on these SLA negotiations, right? So
Yeah.
it's not just technical, as you said.
And
So,
sorry to
no,
interrupt, but the
sure.
other thing is that's part of also why we're moving to model more private networks. Because I think first of all, there is potential for ultra reliability to really thrive in private networks, which are more targeted in terms of their deployment and the type of service that they're supposed to employ. Um, and rather than thinking about ultra reliability as a service that a large operator or commercial operator would offer throughout its entire area of coverage, which is often an entire country, right?
Yeah.
It's a very large area.
So, along the same lines, I saw a question here from Edwin Monroy, and the sentence is not complete, but I can try to complete it. So he says or asks about how does your proposed multi-operator sharing solution compare with something like, say, distributed MIMO or cooperative MIMO joint transmission?
Yeah, so comp, for example, right?
Yeah,
That would be more in line with what we're calling single operator
right.
multi-connectivity, right?
Yeah,
You're connecting simultaneously to several base stations of your own operator in a comp set. So that's what we try to model when I talked about single multi-connectivity, single operator. The model itself is fairly simple, so it doesn't really get to the complexities of distributed MIMO and so on, but it's trying to get at some of those gains, which is the other way to do it, right? So to try to obtain the same sorts of gains in reliability by taking advantage at the same time of the fact that you may have maybe in the coverage area of multiple base stations of the same operator. I think that becomes an even more important question in this indoor environment that we're starting to explore, because
yeah.
these are environments that, if we use the 3GPP model, really require, first of all, a lot of directional transmission, a lot of MIMO, potentially comp, to just manage the interference environment because you have a high density of base stations in a fairly small area. So you need to do a lot of interference management and and to use these base stations effectively, you would use MIMO and potentially comp.
You
We
know,
started looking at that, but I can't claim that we have gone too deep into that model yet.
when I was listening to you, I remembered the cognitive radio research we used to do like 50, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. So there was also this problem about the spectrum sharing, right? And there were many papers, a lot of research on using game theory models for the multi-operator sharing type, right? Because it's kind of like game theory. And similar concepts can be used here too, like, how these operators will decide for their resource utilizations, because it's a game. And so at the end, based on those results, they can establish new service level agreements. So I think there is some research opportunity there. So that's
Yeah,
what
I
what came
totally
to
agree.
mind.
It is the work on cognitive radio from a decade ago or more that kind of inspired us to look at multi-operator connectivity.
Exactly, right,
But then these non-technical issues,
right,
yeah, you can try to treat them and model them using things like game theory. So looking at incentive structures for different players, so in this case, different operators, which have incentives both to share, but all so that they achieve better performance, but also to not share,
right.
so that they preserve competitive advantage.
So I have one more question, and I will let you to Alessia. I'm sure she's waiting eagerly now. And but I would like to ask this because it's, in my opinion, it's interesting to know your opinion. So you also talked about stochastic geometry, which is really very interesting modeling direction, and especially you can capture large scale network randomness. And in this case, we are looking at the ultra reliability, right? And so don't details of the distributions, like so-called rare events, you mentioned, I guess, in some on one of your slides, like if you have infrastructure failures or correlated shallowing, so they may become the dominant factor. So how
Mhm.
does your model account for these extreme value events, but rare events, right? And what is the sensitivity of your bandit results to these tail assumptions? This is a little picky question, but I just want to know what you think.
No, this is the big challenge, right? So that we are trying to model these low probability events, and you're always looking at the tail of the distribution. In simulation, we started by just doing a lot of simulations so that you can 10 to the 7 runs or something very large number, so that we can start seeing these rare events. And then we have some work that tries to use some other techniques from risk management, which have nothing to do with networks, but is in the literature on risk management, where they are modeling rare events. So the risk that you incur of seeing one of these black swan, I guess, events. So there's some literature there that we are able to apply in some of our modeling. But yeah, you're looking at tails of distributions. Now, using the stochastic geometry is actually you're chasing a closed form expression or a mathematical expression
Right.
for some of these things. So it becomes actually more feasible to look at those at the tail of the distribution, because you can kind of obtain some results about the distribution in general. Um, in simulation, you just have to do it a lot, and it's very challenging
Sure.
uh, to observe these rare events. We've been
And
doing some stochastic geometry for a while now, look at different problems, including the problem of network sharing. So in some work that's now about 10 years old,
yeah,
looking at how do we model multiple operators and the correlation between their deployments using stochastic geometry. I think it's a really good tool. We don't have a lot of mathematical tools to understand large-scale networks.
yes,
So that's one tool for us to model the randomness in the in the deployment in an urban or in a macro network in particular, in the randomness of the users themselves and the channel. So yeah, it's something that we've used in some other contexts as well.
but the bottom line is there are many research questions, which is good that will those will keep you busy and your people. So again, thanks a lot, Luis, and I ask Alessia to join us. and ask you some life lesson questions. And good to see you, and I hope we'll see you somewhere soon. Thank you
Good to
again.
see you, Ian. Thank you again for the invitation, and
Sure, it's
happy
our pleasure.
travels. I'm sure that please let me know if you're in the area, and so that we can meet in person again.
Sure, sure, of course. I wish
Thank
we
you
could
so much.
meet in Brazil, but anyhow, you are still in USA. See you guys. I'm
But
still
we'll
here.
do
So.
final greetings afterwards, after the Wisdom Corner. So don't worry. But thank you very much, Professor Da Silva, for your excellent presentation. And thanks a lot, Ian, for moderating the session. So welcome to the Wisdom Corner, live life lessons, which aims at offering a unique and special angle to this series of webinars, so adding a personal touch. So I would ask my first question to our speaker. So looking back on your journey, what is the most valuable life lesson or even a failure that you have encountered that shaped your path? Maybe when you were very young, you were just started your career, and how can this lesson can inspire or guide those attending the webinar?
Yeah, so thank you, Alessia. And it's a little bit daunting to think that I have wisdom, right? So I don't know how much wisdom I actually have. Um, but yeah, one thing that to me has been fundamental in my entire career is who I worked with. So I had the good fortune to work with wonderful people, both as my students, as my mentors, as my colleagues at every level. So if there's an advice here is choose carefully who you work with. Try to work with people that you admire, that you like, if at all possible, because it makes the relationship much more productive and the work much more fun. Um, I am someone that always enjoyed to actually work with people. So like I wasn't the kind of researcher who would thrive on my own without a lot of collaboration. So I've enjoyed these collaborations. I think they added a lot. I owe a lot of to the extent that I'm successful to these. So yeah, pick the right people, pick the right colleagues if you can, good mentors, change your
Yeah.
life. And if you're a professor, good students also make the entire difference.
Yeah, makes sense. But what key advice would you give to young professionals, to students trying to build, aspiring to build a career in academia or research? In your experience, what essential skills and qualities contribute most to success in these fields?
Um, well, curiosity is one, right? So you need to be curious about how things work, how things can be improved. Um, and because then you're going to think about good questions to ask, and
Mhm.
that's how we start every research, which is with a question. Right? So how what is inspiring you to try to find something out? It's either a better understanding of the world that we live in, or seeking to improve some process or some mechanism. Um, yeah, if you're young and starting your career, I think also be open to opportunities. I think success is made of many things, right? So part of it is hard work. I think part of it is some talent for whatever you chose to do, and part of it is just a bit random, right? So
Yes.
but the part that is a bit random, that where you have to rely on a bit of chance, you still have to recognize when opportunity presents itself.
Yeah.
Uh, so you can't always control the opportunities, but if you're open and recognize, oh, okay, this is something that will add to my life and to my career, um, then that's a crucial thing. Because sometimes you also let opportunity pass because we don't quite recognize it.
Absolutely. But what first inspired your passion for your field, and how did you turn this interest into a meaningful career?
I think first of all, the first thing that I wanted was actually to teach. So
Okay.
it's something that probably came first for me. And I realize for every person is a little bit different. So other people are more kind of get into an academic career because of research. But in my case, it was really teaching. And I have two brothers who are younger, and they still complain to anyone who will listen that I forced them to play in a school, right? So our play was I was the teacher, they were the students, and they didn't really enjoy that, but I basically bribed them to do it. So that's kind of my earliest memory of how I wanted to do this. And then research kind of became a passion as I started and progressed in my academic career. And so, because I started to see, okay, this is something that maybe we can find out that no one has found out before, and something that will contribute to the world, even if it's a small thing that we're just adding to this immense body of knowledge. Um, there's a lot of rewards in that, and then you also start connecting to a community, right? So there are people with whom I have worked for decades now. There are people that even though I've worked with in a limited capacity, I've known for decades, like Ian and many others. And you kind of become part of this community, which is extremely rewarding. So yeah, to me, it started with teaching, and then and as I started to do research, that sparked a new passion, which is another thing that people should be, I think, ready for. That your career changes and your interests change as you age, and sometimes you kind of move between different aspects of the job.
Yeah, very good. And among your career achievements, is there one particular contribution that, whether professional or personal, that has a profound impact on you or on others? And what makes this accomplishment especially important, meaningful to you?
So I'm very proud of all the students that I've worked with, and hopefully I've had an impact on some of their lives. But I think the one thing that ends up being a highlight is my PhD students, right? So I had to give a presentation a few years ago at Trinity College. For when I became a chair professor, they have this inaugural chair presentation, and that's how I ended it with like the pictures of all my PhD students, because they really worked with me to lay all of the groundwork for all of the work that I've done throughout my career. And they many times they've become friends because you end up working so closely with them that it becomes a really special relationship. And now I see some of them, as professors, as leaders in industry, and there's a real sense of okay, this is carrying forward to the future. So I think if I have to single out one thing, it would be all the PhD students that I worked with.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that was my last question to you for the Wisdom Corner. Thank you very much for sharing with us your experience and also providing some advice to early career researchers and students. So Ian, back to you.
Thank you, Alessia. And again, thank you, Luis, for everything. And so we will continue our webinar series the next several
Tuesday?
weeks.
Yeah.
And so we look forward to seeing the audience. We had some large number of people. I checked the list. And Luis, really appreciate it. And it was fantastic. And our webinar is really successful so far. We attracted all excellent people. And thank you. And have a nice evening wherever you are. Okay.
Thank you very much,
So,
Ian. Thank you, Alessia, for all the good
Thank
questions
you
and
very
for the
much.
opportunity to
Thanks a
talk
lot
to
for
you.
your contribution.
thank you,
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye
Bye.
bye. Ciao, ciao. Bye. Adios.
Bye.
Bye.